Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Brennan, and I am the advocacy lead here in Washington, D.C. for the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation. I'd like to welcome everybody and first wish everybody a very happy leap year edition of Rare Disease Day. We are really excited to have an opportunity again to talk with you about some of the exciting opportunities in the advocacy space that we're engaged in to continue to grow research funding for myotonic dystrophy and talk about ways that you can get involved. We've got three really special guests today. We've got Mark Planco from Florida, whose background is veterinary medicine and has been a longtime Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation advocate who participated in a wonderful panel discussion we did with the FDA at the annual conference in Washington, D.C. last September. Mark's going to share at the end of my presentation a bit about his personal journey and how he's been engaged in advocacy. We also have Dr. Belen Esparis, who is from Pennsylvania. It's from Pennsylvania and is also a national board member of the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation and a member of our National Advocacy Committee. Also a very engaged leader in the advocacy space who's going to talk a little bit about, from the perspective of a caregiver and a clinician, the work that she's been doing in advocacy. And lastly, we have Haley Martinelli, who is a lawyer from Cleveland, Ohio, and who has also a national board member for the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation, and has joined Mark in speaking a bit about her journey with our colleagues at the FDA as we talked about, efforts to help get the agency a little bit more up to speed on what it's like to live with myotonic dystrophy. What are some of the clinical endpoints that are important to people with myotonic dystrophy, and how folks with myotonic dystrophy are willing to take on certain acceptable risks as we think about, the hope to be soon approval of new drugs and therapies to treat myotonic dystrophy. So it's been a big week in Washington, D.C. I've had the opportunity to participate in a number of activities celebrating and advocating on behalf of individuals with rare diseases. On Monday, I was with the Every Life Foundation as a part of their conference where we were educating the public and stakeholders, and eventually went to Capitol Hill to talk about the importance of the Orphan Drug Act and other federal programs like newborn screening that are really important to the rare community. Some of you may have seen last night, the White House hosted an event that included folks from Every Life, from NORD, and a few organizations, including NIH and FDA, that talked about the need for more research, the need for more innovation. It was a really wonderful event last night. And today, the House Energy and Commerce Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives has been holding a hearing all morning on a series of bills that would advance research and innovation and access to care for people with rare diseases. So there's a lot happening this week, and it's been a very exciting time. So we're glad that you all could join us. And we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the rare disease that we care most about, which is myotonic dystrophy. So what is Rare Disease Day? Rare Disease Day was launched in 2008, and it is a globally coordinated movement on rare diseases, working towards equity and social opportunity, healthcare, and access to diagnosis and therapies for people living with a rare disease. It is a patient-led and includes individuals, families, caregivers, healthcare providers, researchers, clinicians, policymakers, industry representatives, and the general public, all raising their collective voice to build awareness and take action for this vulnerable population and community who require immediate and urgent action. Collectively, we aim, Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation, to participate in this larger effort to change and improve the lives of the 300 million people worldwide who are living with a rare disease. So within that construct, what is the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation doing? And I like to think of our advocacy in, there's areas like I talked about it with the Congressional hearing around orphan drug incentives and other things that are sort of global incentives to help industry invest in rare diseases because they're smaller populations. They tend to perhaps want to chase after something that involves heart disease where there's a larger population, or some forms of cancer. So there are incentives built in that encourage companies to make those investments, take on some of that risk. And so we speak with a collective voice with Every Life and NORD in those efforts. But there's some issues that if the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation and our community doesn't raise our voice, nothing happens. So what we're focused in on those areas where, those individual voices speaking on behalf of the myotonic dystrophy community are critically important. Members of Congress and policymakers aren't going to know about myotonic dystrophy, aren't going to be in a position to help us if we're not educating them and telling them our stories. So what are we trying to accomplish this year? So one of the most exciting new advocacy programs that we are launching this year is we are asking Congress to support the addition in the budget of a dedicated $10 million DM research funding as part of the congressionally directed medical research program. So this would be a line item that is only for DM researchers. It is a brand new effort. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of us, urging our representatives and senators to do the right thing. This is on top of work we've now been successful in. This would be our 8th year in seeking funding eligibility as part of a similar program managed by the Department of Defense called the Peer Reviewed Medical Research Program. So we'll talk a little bit more about these programs, but we've really seen a tremendous increase in research funding and opportunities through these two efforts. And they've only been made possible because of the work of Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation Grassroots Advocates. So let's talk about why this is important, okay? So myotonic dystrophy research. So I'm going to use my fancy pointer here. And you can see this line here where we talk about, this is the National Institutes of Health Myotonic Dystrophy Research Funding line. And here you'll see FY14. That means fiscal year 2014. So roughly 10 years ago. So you'll see here, we've got $9 million for this year. 9, 9, 11. We go to 13, 12, 13. It's pretty steady. And in fact, if you consider inflation, it's probably not really even keeping track with inflation. And then when we move into fiscal year 23 and 24, there's asterisks there because those grant processes are not completely finalized. So we don't know what those final numbers are going to be. These are estimates that are provided by the NIH. Okay. So that is about $100 million in total research funding over the decade. So knowing that we've had a hard time moving the needle with the NIH for a variety of reasons, the organization said, well, we know of a different research funding program called the Peer-Reviewed Medical Research Program that is run by the Department of Defense up in Fort Detrick, which is in Frederick, Maryland, which is about an hour north of Washington, D.C. So what you need to do to get eligible for that program is you need to have at least one United States senator make a request of the Senate Appropriations Committee that they would like to see a particular disease or condition included in this program. Funding for this program is run anywhere over the decade from, say, $300 million to, I think we're up to about $340 million now. And there's anywhere from 40 to 60 diseases and conditions that are listed in the legislation get passed every year. And those conditions are eligible. So if you're a researcher at Stanford or at Yale or at Johns Hopkins, and you're involved in myotonic dystrophy research, in 2017, you couldn't apply for funding under the program because we weren't eligible. In 2018, you could apply for the program. And you can see we've got a steady increase over time, which our most recent known funding level is $8.8 million. So we're actually almost equaling here the entire funding budget out of the National Institutes of Health. So through your advocacy, we have essentially doubled the amount of research dollars that are available that our community can compete for, so that we can continue to drive, further our understanding of what causes myotonic dystrophy and how we can treat it and eventually cure it. So if you ever feel that Congress is listening or that they're not paying attention to us, they are, and this is the proof. But we need to continue every single year to ask Congress to maintain our eligibility. Every single condition or disease that receives funding out of this program, whether it's breast cancer, Alzheimer's disease, arthritis, every year those organizations have to go back to Congress and ask to be included in the program. So you can see here at the bottom, this is then where our final total funding amounts are. I guess one last thing to add, and this slide doesn't reflect this, but it's our understanding that the program has awarded so far at least $5 million in fiscal year 23. Hopefully that goes up, but we know of at least a couple of grants that total that now. So, and one of the things that we've been doing, I think very important to note, is we've been linking the people that run the program at Fort Detrick with our researchers. And so annually now, they've been working with us on a webinar so that our researchers can come in and hear directly from the program leads as to what they're looking for in the grants, how the grants are designed, ways that they can increase chances of success. So we're not just advocating and having eligibility. We're making sure that after that happens, that we're linking the folks that are going to be awarding the funding with the folks who are making those decisions. And I think that's what's really been exciting and has led to a lot more success. We're also each year nominating several folks from the community to serve as consumer reviewers on these peer review panels, so that we've got some folks there who have real world understanding and experience of myotonic dystrophy. And again, I think that increases our chances of success. So why do grassroots advocacy? As I told you, I think, I'll go through this one kind of quickly, because I think those slides demonstrate why grassroots advocacy is important. But you'll see folks want to influence policies and budgets. That's what we're trying to do. It strengthens, grassroots movements are built on authentic voices, though. We want to make sure that we are sharing personal stories that you'll hear from Mark and Haley and Belen. We want you to make sure that you can really help somebody who is either a staff person on the Hill or a member of Congress walk in your shoes for a little bit. Talk to them a little bit about what it's like to live with myotonic dystrophy or to care for someone with myotonic dystrophy and the challenges that our community faces. And particularly that we've gone for too long without having any FDA-approved treatments for this condition, and that research funding is the key to us learning about the disease and getting those treatments approved. Grassroots advocacy is the most effective form when we've got the maximum number of people who have a simple, unified request. So again, we're really rallying around our 2 research requests that we'll talk about. And then lastly, making sure that we ask our representatives, did you do what we asked us to do? So as I said, if we don't raise these awareness on the Hill and ask for this research dollars, who will? No one's going to. It's up to us. If Congress doesn't understand what myotonic dystrophy is, they're not going to support research funding. If you're a constituent, meaning you live in a congressional district or state, you have a fair amount of power. Come November, those same folks are going to be asking you to do something for them, which is vote for them. And as a constituent, it's super important for you to say, hey, I want you to do this. I'm going to follow up in 2 weeks and find out whether you did what I asked or not. And we'll talk a little bit more about exactly what that's going to mean. And again, personal stories are just so incredibly important. So here's where we are in the congressional budget process. This is probably the least exciting slide that I have, but it's super important. So usually the process works, and I say usually because we're in the midst of a budget challenge right now that you may have been reading about in the newspapers. But usually the president comes before Congress in the beginning of the year to deliver the State of the Union address. And a few days or a few weeks after that address, which is usually in January or February, the president submits their budget proposal to Congress. And that kicks off the appropriations process. And that's where we get into influence and say, as part of the budget that you are putting together, we want to see myotonic dystrophy included in the following programs. So that's why the spring is always a really important time for our advocacy, because that's when they are putting this together. If you wait till July, you'll get a response of, well, we've already done the work. Where were you in March or April when we needed to hear from you? We already put it together. We didn't hear from you, so you're not in the program. So that's why the timing of this is really important. What gets a little wonky here is that they haven't, that process then, usually in the summer, you'll see copies of the House and Senate bills on the Department of Defense and other programs, and you'll see whether we were successful in being included in those programs or not. By October, by the end of October is when the fiscal year ends. The end of September is when the fiscal year ends. And on September 1st, October 1st is when the new fiscal year begins. Congress did not complete work before the end of and start of the new fiscal year we are in, which is fiscal year 2024. So they've been operating under what they call continuing resolutions, or CRs is the shorthand. All those are basically taking the prior year's funding level and just having them come forward. So they don't reflect any of the new priorities that you've built into a budget. So we've reached deadlines for funding that are hitting in March. I'm hopeful, fingers crossed, that those budgets get done and we are finished with fiscal year 24, even though we're halfway into it. One of the reasons why that's important is the CDMRP and the PRMRP programs are not included in the president's budget ever. It is purely a function of Congress to add those in. So if you do a continuing resolution, the PRMRP and CDMRP programs are not in it. So currently the program is kind of in a suspended state. They're not able to do a whole lot right now. I'm not terribly worried that the problems that are happening are going to affect us long term. But just know that it is a bit of a challenge, and we're hoping Congress can get this addressed. And we're certainly monitoring that situation closely. So I mentioned in this period of time, we're going to be asking Congress, to support our priorities. So there's two really exciting and important announcements today. So the first one is we are launching today on myotonic.org a whole new Grassroots Advocacy Action Center. So if you go to myotonic.org, you can find it. But if you wanted to go and use the link of myotonic.org/myotonic-dystrophy.advocacy, that would take you directly to the page. But you should be able to find it simply by going to myotonic.org. And you'll see here we advertise on the site that we're doing today's webinar. And then at the very bottom, you'll see a button that says Advocate Now. So this has the headline of support the $10 million that we talked about. So if you go to that site, you will land here. And why this is important for folks who have participated in previous webinars that I've hosted, or even advocacy presentations at the annual conference, or for support group facilitators and other things we've done, you may remember that there's a series of slides that takes you to a series of websites so that you can find your member of Congress, and then you'll have to go to an attachment that we send you, a Word document that will have a sample letter that you'll send to Congress. All of that information is now on myotonic.org. So if you'll see here, you're going to see a headline, and this is personalized. It'll be personalized for you as you enter into the program. I've already sent a letter to my delegate. I live in Washington, D.C., so I don't have 2 senators and 1 member of Congress. I have a delegate. I won't get into a discussion around D.C. statehood and why that's important, but know that you guys have 2 senators and 1 member of Congress, and you should be communicating with all of them. So I sent a letter to my delegate, Eleanor Holmes Norton, from the site. But when you go in here, it's going to allow you to put in your name and your address. And then it's going to pop up your representative and your 2 senators. And below that, and you can see here in the message body, there's a letter that says, I urge your support for the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation's request for $10 million. And then below that, you'll see I've already added my address, but your address will pop up here in your profile. And at the very, very bottom there, you'll see a green button that says send a message. So that will allow you to send that message from myotonic.org to all 3 of those members of Congress. What I would urge all of you to do, and again, what you're going to hear from Mark and Haley and Belen, is talking about your personal story. They need to know that this is coming from the heart, that you care about this. And so if you're really busy and it's the only thing that you can do, it's completely fine to just use the letter that's on the site. But if you have an extra 5 to 10 minutes, or you just want to share your story, feel free to add a sentence or 2 about anything that you want to share. But it's really important. I'll just tell you a quick personal story. Years ago, when I first started on Capitol Hill, one of my early jobs was a legislative correspondent. So I was in charge of answering all the mail that arrived in the office. I'm so old that we didn't have email at the time. But, you'd get a petition that somebody signed, ostensibly in a grocery store parking lot. I want clean water. That would arrive and you'd be like, well, I guess people care about that, but when you got that handwritten, personalized letter that somebody said, look, I don't have clean water in our community and it's affected my child's, ability to live a healthy life. And here's some of the details about what's happening. You're like, that carried a lot of weight. And in fact, my first boss on the Hill, he would take a few of those letters periodically and he would pick up the phone and call the folks that wrote the letter. Because they had that much weight. So it really does matter sharing your personal story. And I would encourage folks to do this. But this site should be infinitely easier to do that. The other thing that's super cool about this site is it's going to allow us to track, not in a bad way, but in a good way, track who is using the site and where letters are going to. So as your representative here in Washington, D.C., my job is to be your boots on the ground. It's my job to be going to, Mark's senators in Florida or, Belen senators in Pennsylvania or Haley's in Ohio. And I can go now with a lot more credibility and say, hey, I know that you've been hearing from a lot of folks back home about this CDMRP request. What do you think? Your boss going to be able to help us with that? Here's some information I've got on this. So I can help nudge them a little bit along the path. And so when you can credibly know that that's happening, it really has a huge impact. So it will be, as they say, a force multiplier in our advocacy, our ability to understand that. And, it might even make it fun, for folks who want to get a little competitive and want to think about, okay, well, I've got so many folks from my, my community that are involved. You could email me and say, all right, how many folks did we get? I got a big campaign that I launched 2 weeks ago with some of my friends and family. I want to see if it's paying any dividends. You can contact me or even Cleed in the national office and ask if we have some numbers that you can see. Is it making a difference? Are folks responding to our requests for support? So I think this is a really exciting feature and a really great opportunity. So before I hand it off to my colleagues, I just want to share one other really exciting development that we want to talk about. So as we are moving forward with our efforts to get support for our CDMRP $10 million request, a new tactic that we're going to be deploying in our advocacy, which we really haven't been able to do before, is to get a Republican and a Democrat in the House and the Senate to lead letters of support for this request that would go to the Appropriations Committee. And what you're going to see in about a week or two is an action alert that comes out from us. What's exciting is we have 2 members of Congress now from the House, Congresswoman Higgins from Virginia Beach and Congressman Moskowitz from Florida, who have agreed to co-lead those letters. And we're going to have an opportunity to send out a grassroots action alert that says, ask your member of Congress to co-sign the Higgins-Moskowitz letter on myotonic dystrophy research. And there'll be a deadline. We haven't determined it yet. We'll probably have the letter will be open for, say, 3 weeks or so. And we're going to be pounding the pavement to get as many members of Congress to sign that letter, because the more members that sign onto that letter, the louder their voices internally. It's almost like the grassroots I talked about, right? So we on the outside want to influence how Congress acts. There's also an inside game that happens, and that's what we're playing here. So if we have the Higgins and Moskowitz letter, we get 20 members of Congress to sign that. That means 20 members of Congress are asking the chair and the ranking Democrat on that House Appropriations Committee to support this. And that's a powerful message. It won't be easy to get this $10 million. It's going to take a lot of work, and we're going to need every single person engaged in this effort. But it's just incredibly helpful that this is happening. We're also talking to 2 folks over in the United States Senate. One of the folks that I think is interested is Senator Amy Klobuchar, who spoke at the annual conference at the Senate briefing that we hosted. So her staff is looking at the letter. We're hopeful that she'll be the one to co-lead it. And then once that happens, we'll start working with a Republican over in the Senate to see if we can get a similar letter generated, and there'll be an action alert attached to that. So we're really, really excited about it. And it is a wonderful development, and it is a great advocacy tool, because you'll really then be able to hold them accountable and say, well, did you sign the letter or not? And you'll be able to see after it's done whether they listen to us or not. So with that, Mark, I'm going to stop screen sharing and see if I can do this right. Okay. And I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about your story.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Most of you know a lot of my story from the conference, but my advocacy journey really started when I was diagnosed. Because when I was diagnosed, I can realize that my children also had it. So as their advocate, it started early, when I was 40. So he got more active and much more open about my advocacy, still in September when I had the big push for the FDA. Going to Congress was very dramatic for me. Everyone that we spoke to was very receptive, interested, wanted to learn. We don't know what they did with it going back to their representatives, but we had a great experience in Congress, and I think that we helped a lot. And, the more that we do that kind of thing, the stronger we'll be. I'm actually a consumer reviewer for the CDMRP. So the researchers that applied for funding through that was some really, really great stuff. A lot of brain things, a lot of medication for trials. So being included in that DoD money is very important, and we got to stress to our representatives and our senators how important it is to stay in that program. Only give some props to the leader of the Florida advocacy group. Kristen has done a really great job with running it every month, and we get a lot of participants. And last month we didn't have a huge group, but I'm sure she went back and contacted everyone else who's been on before. And I expected, I don't know how many people are on now, but she's done a great job with keeping Florida very strong in advocacy. And I'm sure all of us will get on to the letter and can get as much voice as we can.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate that. Belen, let me turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. So I'm Belen Esparis. As Kevin said, I'm a physician. We're now living in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania for the last 4 years. We're in Florida first, so we know Mark very well. Been part of the Myotonic Dystrophy family for the last 12 years after our younger daughter was diagnosed with the congenital form. And along the way, MDF has been an excellent resource for us from the beginning. But we also realized when we went to that first meeting that there was a lot to be done. So we have tried to be as involved as we can. And advocacy is one of those areas in which we have tried to participate actively. One of the MDF meetings, I think it was about 8 years ago, was in DC, like the one last year. And at that meeting, we had a little session where they kind of coach us on how to write a little note to your representative. And we also had the opportunity to go and visit some of the state representatives in small groups. So that was actually my first experience doing this. And it was so, it was emotional because, yes, you do have to tell your story, and that's important. And the more truthful you are when you're doing that, the best. You also have to be able to summarize it because you only get a few minutes with these people. But it was such a powerful experience that I was very motivated to keep doing it when we went back home. And we did for several years. We wrote to our representatives and to the senators, and we were really surprised at the beginning because you get answers. You get a response. Yes, we received your note or your letter, and we will respond. And most of the offices, at least that has been my experience, they do get back to you. And if not, if you contact them to follow up, they will tell you something. Yes, we will support it. No, we won't, or because of this or that. So it was really enlightening to see that we do have power as a community, and we do have powers as active members of this community. So I not only care for my kids at home, who are now, we know both are affected, but, I take care of patients with this condition in the office. So being a physician also gives me that little edge, because then I can add that to my letter and advocate not only for my family, but for my patients. So I encourage everyone to try it. You will be surprised. Now it's so easy with this new tool that we have on the website. I'm so excited. And, last year, Mark was her first time visiting Congress. It wasn't my first time, but we had an amazing advocacy day a day before the actual MDS meeting last year. So we were happy to meet another family from Pennsylvania, and the power of the story is just amazing. No, this family was a mother and a son, and the son is a young adult affected, and he was just showing these people, because they were asking, the representatives were asking, how does the disease affect you? And he just said, well, I get myotonia. And they said, what is that? And he was showing them live what myotonia does to your hands. And it was just incredible. I felt so honored to be there with that family and to open the eyes of those representatives that were truly, most of the people that we met were truly interested in learning why is this important, how does the disease affect you, and why we should invest more money on research for it. So don't hesitate contacting anybody. And I'm pretty sure I can speak for me, but anybody that is on this panel would be happy to help you if you have any questions or doubts or maybe any advice on how to do it. When we moved to Pennsylvania, then I said, so now I was so comfortable. I knew my representative, I knew my senators, like I had everything set up. In Florida, I actually used to use an app that you could actually, through the app, contact them. When I got here, I said, oops, we got to start from scratch. But it was fine. Last year, I contacted Senator Casey, and he wrote back and he said, I'll say yes to put myotonic dystrophy on the CDMRP, PRMRP. I always get confused with the acronym list, and that gives the opportunity for all those wonderful researchers that are so motivated to keep learning about the disease and help us find treatments and a cure to apply for those funds and do what they are with what they know what to do, which is learn about how we can take care of this, take care of our families, take care of our patients, and hopefully have treatments very soon. So that's me.
Well, and Belen, a real hat tip to you and the folks in Pennsylvania, because that was the first time that Senator Casey had included myotonic dystrophy in his appropriations request. And it was thanks to the work that you and other advocates in Pennsylvania led that he became aware of it and made that change. So we can do it in other states too if they follow your example. Other thought that you reminded me of is I know that I was with one of our wonderful advocates, Lauren Brand from Minnesota, about a couple of weeks ago on the Hill. And, one of the things she did, and again, it just shows you the power of personal stories and advocacy and being present. But she had the staff and all of us hold our hands like this. And then she said, release your hand. And so I was able to do this, even though you can see with my arthritis, my hands aren't quite pretty. But and then her hand slowly opened. And she said, that's myotonia. And the staffers were like, oh, I didn't.
Yep.
And it was a real opportunity. So, again, just one thought of ways that we can continue to help these folks understand what's happening. And remember, in the course of their day, if you're a healthcare staffer, you're meeting with the hospital in your district, you're meeting with ambulance providers, you're meeting with pharmaceutical companies, folks that make imaging equipment, any number of clinicians from primary care to cardiology to what have you. So, it's really important too that advocacy not just be a once a year thing. We have to continue to find ways to be engaged so that we can be sticky, in their heads. So thank you, Glenn, for that. Haley, I'm going to hand the floor to you.
No problem.
Thanks. So hello, everyone. Like Kevin said, I'm Haley Martinelli, and I live with DM. I got involved with advocacy really in preparation for this past annual conference in DC. And I went into it, with no real experience with advocacy, but I just felt compelled to get involved with that and use my voice. I think we're at such a pivotal time in, with the state of research and drug development that I, felt that this was an important time to get involved with advocacy and urging Congress to support funding for myotonic dystrophy. So, like I said, I hadn't done it before, but I went to the Capitol Hill Day at the annual conference, and prior to it served as the state captain for my state. So I kind of coordinated scheduling all the meetings with my state and the representatives and senators. And so that involved reaching out to the senators and the Congress people for Ohio. And that was a little intimidating because I hadn't done it before. So didn't really know what to expect in sending out those emails and making those calls. But I was surprised, like others have said, I got responses, from everybody, and they were all positive. And, all of them were, yeah, absolutely, we're happy to meet with you. And, we scheduled it and got those meetings set up, and then we're able to, meet at the conference. And, going into the meetings was also, a little bit intimidating, just not knowing what to expect. And I think, hearing all of the wonderful information that Kevin has to share, it's a little, it can be easy to think like, oh, I have to be an expert in all of that kind of logistical stuff and legislative history and funding and all of that. But, in my experience, the questions that I got were really, they wanted to hear about my story and the other folks that I was with, the advocates' stories. They wanted to know about myotonic dystrophy. And, we're already experts in that. So, of course, it's, good to have a general idea of what it is that you're asking them to do. But I found that it really didn't need to be like an expert in the kind of nitty gritty of all of the other congressional process and all of that, which I think can get a little bit overwhelming. So I think, try not to get intimidated by that, and just remember that you're already the expert in myotonic dystrophy, and that's really what we need to convey to the Congress people, is what it's like to live with myotonic dystrophy or care for somebody with myotonic dystrophy. And we're the best people to be able to convey that. And all the meetings that I had, like other folks have said, were really positive. Everyone was surprisingly really engaged and asked a lot of good questions and seemed to really want to get to know more, which I I didn't really expect. I guess my only other experience with Congress people was kind of, trying to rush you along, but that was not my experience at all. They seemed very interested in kind of wanting to hear more and understand a little bit more about, this disease that most of them, if not all of them, had never heard of before. So, I think as community members, advocacy is something, we can all do to use our voice to make a difference. A lot of us, except for Belen, maybe are not scientists. So I'm not going to be in the lab cooking up a cure, but this is one thing that I can do to make a difference. So I am excited to continue to do that and continue to build relationships with my representatives and senators. And especially now with this new portal on the website, it makes it so much easier than sending the individual letters and everything. That's my story.
Great, Haley. Thank you. And Haley, that's a really great point you've made about, I always say this to folks, like we're not sending you to the Hill or asking you to do meetings or send letters or engage with anybody with the assumption that you're going to be a master of the legislative process. You're a master of your story and your journey, and you're asking them, because that's what their jobs are, to be the master of the legislative process. You're simply saying, look, we need more money for research. In this case, specifically $10 million. Help us make that happen. But that's not your job. So don't go in there thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to know, everything Kevin just talked about on the budget process and when things happen. We'll let you know when that happens. We want to be here to help facilitate this so that you're able to tell your story in the most authentic and powerful way. A couple of good comments have come in since you guys were telling your stories. And Haley, one of them is your fellow board member and Buckeye State resident, Tom McPeak. Tom said, I just sent my letters to my senators and congressmen using the MDF Action Center, and it took less than 3 minutes. This is great. Everyone can do it. So super great that he was able to do that. I hope others are too. And again, we'll be able to tell if you did. And then there's a woman, Darlene Duran from Canada, who asks, or I assume she's from Canada. Forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but my assumption is, since she asked the question, are Canadians able to participate and fill this out? Would that have any impact? Unfortunately, given how, our Congress works, they are going to pay attention to people that live in their states or congressional districts. So if you were, going to do a visit with somebody, say, who was from, if you joined Haley going to, Senator Brown from Ohio, and you came with her, your story would matter. It would be something that they'd want to listen to. But as far as directly communicating and asking, they won't respond to an email that you send from the website that is from an address outside of the United States, unfortunately. But I certainly encourage, and I've talked to a number of folks in Canada who have had success advocating for research funding or advocating for, proclamations that, recognize September 15th as International Myotonic Dystrophy Awareness Day. So, a lot of what we're talking about, is portable for folks that have, democracies or representative governments like we have here in the United States. So if you're living in Europe or Canada or Japan or Australia or other places where you've got elected representatives who are paying attention to what their constituents are saying, and you identify, a problem, in those countries, I know in most cases you've got a different healthcare system. And so there might be advocacy to me sometimes is problem solving. You're like, well, we've got a problem here with a deficit in research funding. So we're focused on that. In other countries, you might find that there's a challenge getting access to neurology care that you need because of the way your system is designed. So it might be that that's the advocacy program, that you want to initiate there to talk to your representatives in Ottawa or, in other foreign capitals about, hey, we need to change these things. So, we are very eager to help support our friends and colleagues who are in other countries. And I'm available to talk to folks individually about how to organize and put those campaigns together. But unfortunately, participating through the website to communicate to our Congress probably it won't hurt. but you're likely not to get a response back. All right, let me ask a couple of questions, and as others come in, Mark, let me ask you a question. So I know that when you guys were in DC in September, a number of folks in the Florida delegation used photographs and albums to help communicate. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that and if that was successful?
Yeah, I actually meant to talk about that. Yeah, the group we had at the Hill did an amazing job. One had an easel and flipped pages that showed her story. There was one who had albums too, and actually made them that they left with them, and it showed everything from it had the wedding picture, and as the husband progressed and the sons progressed, and like my kids were the most precocious, healthiest, greatest kids, and when they reached their early teens, it all changed. And, none of us expect this kind of journey. It's kind of dictated to us. But, the people at the Hill, that worked with us, one was confined to a wheelchair and couldn't really even lift anything at all. And he was a very educated he was an engineer. He actually got diagnosed a long time ago. But, we had him, we had us, we had these storybooks. It was very impactful. In fact, we were expected to be, rushed in, you get this many minutes, rushed out. Well, we had to end each session because we had to get to the next one. And no one rushed us. They asked questions. They wanted to see these things. It was really, really impactful and surprising in how much support they wanted to give us. I don't know, we met with people who don't have that say, but if they represented to their delegates, then they're gonna, feel it too. But yeah, we impacted them greatly, and great stories and great visuals.
That's great, Mark. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I think that was you inspired a lot of folks that were in Washington in September with those advocacy tools. A lot of people came back and said, I'm going to bring pictures. I'm going to bring albums, next time. And so for folks to remember too, you don't have to come to DC to do that. You can reach out through the website, figure out who your members are, and ask to meet them when they're back in the districts or in their states. And maybe they're not available, but maybe somebody on their staff is. So if you wanted to, reach out to Mark or just use the example that he talked about in doing that, go for it. We've got a question. Mark, you may know this person. It's a woman named Lori Planco who sent us a message to the website. So let me see if I can handle this.
Taking my chin down, what is she saying?
It's a good question. She said, is there a benefit for non-DM1 community members to send letters? Perhaps the doctors that take care of the patient, as well as our research community. How will MDF get the word out about this feature on the website? We're going to be doing a lot of work in a lot of different, communications vehicles to get the word out that this new capability exists and to encourage more and more people to be involved. This kind of dovetails into a question I was going to ask Belen, actually, and I'm going to ask her maybe to comment after I'm done. There's real strength in having multiple viewpoints, if you will, representative in the storytelling. So having a person who has DM1 or DM2 sharing their experience, having somebody who's a caregiver who can talk from their perspective on how that is to manage given the multi-generational aspect of this condition. That's definitely something that is a different perspective that also, I think, hits folks in an important way. And then we've really tried hard to involve clinicians and researchers. So, Mark in Florida, Eric Wang at the University of Florida, whose father sadly passed away from myotonic dystrophy, and who's really dedicated his life to research in the space, and who is, I just think, one of the most effective scientific communicators I've ever met. And then not everybody's going to have, an Eric Wang in the state or congressional district, but to the extent that you can recruit and bring those folks into the community of advocacy, all the better. Again, it's another perspective that they can bring a little bit of the science. Eric's done a really great job of explaining how research in myotonic dystrophy actually is going to have a ripple effect into other repeat disorders. So a form of ALS and other conditions that actually have a similar genetic profile. The investments we make in myotonic dystrophy research is going to help others. And that's really appealing to members of Congress. So they think of that as sort of a research force multiplier. You mean if I put money into DM research, I could actually help find treatments and cures for other related genetic disorders? So I think all of that is important. And Belen, I'm going to turn to you next to talk about maybe what you've experienced as a clinician and a caregiver and how you think that has affected and improved upon your storytelling.
Well, definitely any caregiver is an expert, like Haley said, and that's what they want to hear. They want to hear what's the struggle. What are the things that make life hard when someone has myotonic dystrophy and you are the person or you are responsible for their care? So definitely, there's no book that can teach anybody that. We know how hard it is. On the clinical side, then we also know it's a different perspective, but we also know how these patients are affected and how difficult sometimes it is to treat them because it's a multi-systemic disease. So these patients are seeing multiple different specialists, and each specialist tries to concentrate in the little area, but it is very difficult to have someone that manages everything that needs to be managed. I do think it's important because every voice counts. You count as a caregiver, you count as a patient, you count as a physician that takes care of these patients, or a physical therapist or a speech therapist. Anybody can write a letter and say, I want this disease supported. I have patients that have this condition. I treat these kids. I treat these adults, and I see how they are affected. It's funny that Lori said that, and each team last year, or not each team, but many people had. We also had someone from Florida, from the Florida research team in our group, going to visit our representatives, and they were also interested in listening from what the researchers are doing in this area, and how far, how much more, how far are we from really knowing everything we need to know to get to treatments. And so they wanted to hear from everybody. It wasn't, of course, the patient voice is the most significant, but they were interested in learning about all the different aspects. I wanted to mention that, I got letters from, I did the letter for my son and had him sign it and send it. I did the letter for my husband and had him sign it. I asked colleagues, would you mind signing this letter? And I did it from them and signed it. So numbers are also important, regardless of, who the letter is coming from. So if you have family, if you have friends that want to support you in this process, their voice is as valid as yours. So I encourage everybody to go on their computers and visit all their neighbors and friends.
Excellent. Thank you for that. One other question we just got from somebody who's an anonymous participant asked, how can we get on the ground advocacy in all states? So I'll attempt to answer this one. So when we were planning last year's annual conference, we had a dedicated day where we had about 130 folks who volunteered. That wasn't the full attendance at the conference, but it was part of the folks that wanted to go to the Hill. And knowing that, we're not a large organization, we have limited staff resources, we started to envision this idea, which hasn't fully formed yet, but we used, at least at the conference, to have state advocacy captains. And Haley talked about that she was our captain from Ohio, and Belen had helped with Pennsylvania. But what we're trying to do is to get advocates in every single state who can, take on more responsibilities in leading and coordinating some of our advocacy. And the reason why for the annual conference it was so important is, if you were coming from Ohio, and I don't remember how many folks we had, but let's say we had 8 or 9 folks from Ohio. We didn't want all 9 of those folks contacting Senator Sherrod Brown's office and asking for individual meetings. We wanted to make sure that was coordinated, and that one person was making that request and leading, the efforts to put that together. So we want to think about that on the local level. And, if folks are interested in maybe serving in that role, or if they don't know if there's somebody there that's kind of performing that, we're going to continue to try to grow that initiative that started last September. And that would be an on the ground, we'll think about a plan of work, if you will, for the year for the advocates to say, look, you should at least have 2 meetings, with each representative and senator in your state. And you maybe do one in the spring and, maybe one in the fall, but you find a reason to do that, or you organize, your grassroots advocacy outreach. You make sure that you're recruiting some number of new advocates, or we're generating new stuff, which we can now measure on the website. But there's a lot of really, I think, cool things that we can do. So our ground advocacy really is what this webinar is about, is trying to teach and grow more folks to step forward and say, hey, I want to be the person in Iowa, or I want to be the person in Arizona, and start to evolve and build that process so that we've really got, again, that louder voice. So let me close this out with kind of our final slide here. Forgive me, I'm trying to make sure everybody can see that. Okay. So what are our takeaways here? Oops. Good. Well, okay, oops. Not too hard. All right, so we want to talk about our final charge here in the 2 or so minutes that we have left. So remember, you are powerful. You've heard from Mark and Haley and Belen, who talked about, that their voice was heard, and that they had different and unique ways to say that. And I wanted to give Haley, if we had more time, to talk about a little of her journey, because she had a very powerful story about her career as a softball player and how much she loved that, and how she's had to, transition, how she pursued her law degree. A lot of folks, because I had the privilege of being in a meeting with her in Senator Brown's office, it really it was the one thing they remembered probably out of the week of all the meetings that they did. So I just think that's really important to dig deep and think about some of those things that may sometimes not be so easy to talk about. They really make a difference. Remember, these folks are, I will joke periodically with people who will say, well, you live in DC and you're inside the Beltway and the swamp. I always say, well, you send these people here. I didn't elect any of these folks. They're not my representatives. They're from Arizona and from California and others. So they want to pay, they're going to pay attention to their constituents and take advantage of that opportunity. Despite a lot of the noise and a lot of the negativity, these folks usually come here because they are public servants, and they, you'll go to an office and it'll say, this office belongs to the people of the 3rd Congressional District in Connecticut. Hold them to that. Remind them that that's the case. They need to be listening to you. I think, and you heard, everybody on that webinar tonight talk about this is a great adventure. You walk into it with a little bit of trepidation. I did when I was trying to get a job on the Hill many years ago. I did when I first started working in the advocacy space. It's a little scary, but when you walk out of that first meeting or you get that first response to one of your emails or calls, it does feel a little different. So jump in, take advantage of the adventure and go forward. And look, know you're making a difference. You heard from Belen and Haley and Mark about the difference that they're making, and you can do the same when we need you to help make that difference. So thank you all very much. I hope everybody has had and continues to have a wonderful Rare Disease Day. And I hope you're inspired to join us on this journey. And I'm always available if folks have questions or comments or need any special help and instruction on that. But go to the website, Keep on the website. We're going to have updates. There's going to be a lot of new exciting news, and we're going to get that $10 million. Thank you all very much.